All right, welcome to Culture Couch Live. Hello, boys. How are you? Emil,
Rizzy,
Jared?
yes, was.
Hello, Paul. How are you?
Going
Emil?
well, thank
Warren?
you. Very, very good. Let's jump straight into it. We've got a question from Shane, gentlemen. So I'd be very interested to hear your views on succession planning, a topic that most businesses, from my experience, could learn more about. Your insights on this topic would be very interesting. I guess maybe I'll start on this one because it was funny and open up. I remember when I was playing and I sort of, as a player, thought, gee, does a coach have a shelf life? Is there a shelf life to a coach? And I came to the conclusion myself that it was probably 6 or 7 years where you sort of get the message across. Now, that was predicated, bearing in mind that I didn't play in a premiership or win a premiership as a player. So I almost felt like, and Murph, I'll probably defer to you first, I almost felt like you sort of reset if you win a premiership. It's almost like starting again. So when I looked at sort of 6 or 7 years, I sort of felt to myself that's without the ultimate success, because the pressure continues to grow and grow and grow and grow. And I noticed that coaches got angrier and angrier, and and through no fault of their own, there just seemed to be a natural use-by date. Now, I think my succession plan was 8 years. I made the decision at the 7-year mark and another 8 years, but another year after that. So, Merv, I might sort of throw to you from a footy point of view, but also from a corporate point of view. Is the succession plan more around how long a CEO can last, or is it more the other way? Is it more just to say, no, we want to get this organisation ready at some point for someone else to take over, or both?
Yeah, I think the truth about the world is if you're leading the same people for a long period of time, you've only got so many things to say, haven't you? You've only got so many tricks up your sleeve, and so it's just human nature. You will start to get a bit boring or a bit tired to the group. So reinventing yourself is really hard. In the corporate world and sporting world, I guess things change. So different leaders will be better in different environments. But I think the succession question is a great question. Like, I think you should always be planning to who's going to take my job next, and bringing people through. And I think in sport, well, you did it really well. You did it twice, didn't you? You did it at Sydney Swans, and Horse went on to win a flag, and then you did it at Melbourne, and Simon Goodwin went on to win a flag. So you're probably the king of succession planning in many ways. What tends to happen though, isn't it, is that often the coaches or CEOs will change the people underneath them. So they'll change the assistant coaches, or they'll change the leadership group, and as a result of that, they get to stay a bit longer because that refreshes the group. But I think if you're serious about it, you should always be planning for who's coming next, and bringing people that are going to push and challenge you, and you can train and support them. And I actually had this conversation with one of my clients this morning. So I don't know if I've answered Shane's question or I've helped you, but I think it is important that you do plan it.
I think it's preparation, isn't it, Wise? Like, how much in the corporate world do people really plan for it? Or do they sort of stumble across it? Or do they just go, I think, Murphy, you made a really good point. Do they tend to get in survival mode and go, well, I better change the people underneath me because they're starting to see cracks in my armour, which I guess is in our wheel space around role model leadership. So rather than exposing the cracks or saying it's time for me to move on, I better shuffle a few people underneath me so they don't. Is that too harsh, Wise, or is that
I think you're right. I think there's two types of individuals. I think there's the individuals that probably don't have something else next to go to, and obviously people are working longer than they ever have been before. But I think it comes back to, I feel like, just and from my perspective, and actually through the evolution of working with you guys, helping me with my own companies, that your role as the leader of the business should be able to get you to a position to which you don't have to be doing any of the work. If you've done the right job, you've actually developed leaders underneath you to do a majority of the coaching of the rest of the team and the work, and they become the next layer of leaders. So I felt like at the previous company, there was probably 2 to 3 individuals directly underneath me that would have quite easily stepped into my role. And I reckon if you are the right leader, that's a really good outcome for you to be able to see it. And you will find yourself in scenarios that you probably don't have much to do, but I don't know if that's a big problem really at the end of the day, because that means culture is working and your leadership role is working.
The truth though was like, if you've got a job that's paying you sort of, somewhere between $600,000 to $1 million a year, which is what a lot of CEOs get paid, and sometimes more in the bigger companies.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty hard to step away, isn't it? Like where else do and if you've got another job to go to. So I understand why people would stay a bit longer than they want, on the basis of like, who else is going to pay me this money, and where else do I get the opportunity for this? I don't know.
And you also, if they've done a good job, they've probably worked themselves into they've mastered their role, so they've built themselves a very good lifestyle as well, right? I think the best leaders actually create a lot of space for themselves to regenerate, and when they are leading and working, they're energized, they're enthusiastic, and they've got a great mindset because they actually have created space. We talk a lot about those busy leaders and that badge of honor. Well, I think the best leaders that I've had the pleasure to work with are the ones that are actually, they've got it in order, right? So you work all that way, then you hand the baton over to change over. So yeah, I think, Jez, you're right there. There's an element of, but I also think that the succession planning, I think it's actually more of a mindset around developing a culture of coaching and being really intentional with the way you set your meeting cadence and the coaching cadence that you empower your leaders to do. Doesn't mean you as the CEO have to leave, right? I think that still allows you to stay, but you're consistently building and developing people, like we say. It's the responsibility of everyone.
Good point. And can I take your role for a second, Rizzy?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, can I just become the host for 1 second and ask you?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Because I reckon you've done it twice. So there's some really good questions here for you. Like, number one, what did you do in order to prepare that person for the role? And number two, how did you, and perhaps number two is number one, really. How did you choose them for a start? So what qualities were you looking for? Were you looking for someone like you, or were you looking for someone different than you? Were you looking for someone to complement your, and so how did you go about choosing the right person? And
then what did you do?
What did you do, and how did you train them?
I reckon that what Emil said was right. It's got to be intentional. Now, that's not to say everything has to happen like it did at the Swans or Melbourne, where I had an absolute end date with both situations. But it has to be intentional. And the intention, Murph, will answer your questions, is we intend to make this place better. We intend to put some processes in place where we empower our people below us, that they're not doing the work that they're managing. And I think footy clubs do that really well. So I think, Murph, the first part was the intention. All right, John Longmire, let's give him the opportunity now over the next 12 months to meet with the board regularly, to establish some really close relationships with his next group of leaders in the player group, to do some things that he potentially wouldn't be able to do. So you're upskilling that particular person. Okay, I thought he was the right person for the job. I wasn't involved in picking John, but I made the decision to go because I thought John was the right person. The Simon Goodwin one, to answer your second question, what are you looking for in a succession? I always felt, how strange is it if we all work at a company and me footy club, why do we always go outside the footy club to find a replacement? It's almost an admission we've buggered something up.
Yeah.
Now so I always thought, particularly in Melbourne, Murph, stability was really important, really important. They've been through a really tumultuous time. So it had to be someone with the similar views, but it's never going to be exactly the same. So when we spoke to Simon, he came out of the Neil Craig camp, and I really had a lot of respect for Craig. He was very much around, as you know, he was very much around behaviours and values and all those sorts of things. But I just think, the probably the thing in Melbourne was getting it across really early, because they'd had so much instability. Guys, you will have a coach. It won't be me for the next 8 years, but if we pick it correctly, it'll be me for 3, and then it'll be Simon for at least 2 or 3. So at least it gives in a footy club, and I suspect businesses are relatively the same, was that people want stability. They want to know that if we start something, so it can't be someone that's going to go, gee, this is going pretty well, I want to improve slightly like this. It can't be someone that's going like that and then goes like that in terms of a complete 180 degree. So does that sort of answer your question, Murph? But I think the intention is really got to be that really important.
Probably the thing that which surprised me most, and I wonder if this is a question for all of us, I guess. You started with the date. So you actually said, so it'd be really interesting to go to a group of CEOs, and I'm going to do this actually next week. I'm going to ask them, when do you think you're going to finish?
Yeah.
And who's like, so I suspect most CEOs wouldn't say this is the date that I'm walking out. So on that basis, they probably haven't got that clarity around training someone up to that point. I don't know.
And I think that's why the systems are important, because I think when we're talking about succession plan, we're talking about more than one type. So mine was an intentional succession plan. Yeah. What I'm talking about, having an intentional development plan.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. Role model leaders. What are your behaviors? Are you having honest conversations? So if you're upskilling your staff, the date becomes less important, Murph, because as soon as you make that, we've already upskilled our next layers below, you touched on it. I'll ask you a question. Were you intentional in doing that? Were you intentional in saying, I really want to upskill the next level for when I walk out? Because I think that's a relevant question.
You told me to do that. I think I spend more time trying to lead rather than do. And we talked about it a lot. But I think the difference here, and maybe Jez's question, is the fact that, in an ideal world, you're training people already within that you've created, a great relationship with, you can trust, and you groom them to the extent that you know that they can do the job because you've been doing the job. I think probably where it's a bit harder in succession planning is really nailing the right candidate to come in, because I think that's a very different factor. Is what characteristics are you looking for? And I think that the stability one is right, but I'm not sure it'd be different for every organisation as to where the business is going and what their intention is over the next 3, 5, 10 years for you to decide on the right leader as well.
And I think too, on that question was, when we did it with Simon, there was other people on the panel. So I think that's a really important thing. Where does the CEO want to take it? Peter Jackson was on the panel. Glenn Bartlett, where does Glenn Bartlett? We had one of the board members on the panel. So Todd Viney was on the panel, who's a long-term Melbourne. So I think that's a really good point. It's who is it going to be? But I think I just keep getting back to, boys, the system. We don't necessarily have to have a date. We don't necessarily have to know who it is. But if we haven't created a system, we're just going to, it'd be like pulling a name out of a hat, really.
Yeah.
I disagree on the date, Rizzy. I reckon the date's absolute. I reckon that's the thing that makes you move.
Yeah, that's good. Constraint.
As you know, I'm supportive of the date, but I think it's less important than the system. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I agree with that. I agree with that.
So then what are some simple and practical tools then that we've used or we've seen out there that we can share with Shane and the audience? I mean, it's funny because about 3 clients over here have actually employed us to very much do and build their system so that they can choose when they pass the business on. They want that freedom to make the decision. Otherwise, I think you're right, Jez, without that constraint, it kind of just stays stuck in the business potentially, right? But one big thing that's coming up recently for a bigger client here is I think you touched on someone before, exposure, like exposing, I think you said the board, Brucey.
Yeah, with John and Simon.
Yeah, giving the individual the chance just to attend a meeting that's above their sort of level and just observe it, just be a fly on the wall and see how professional it is, how we conduct the meetings and all that sort of stuff. And I think that puts a bit of pressure on the individuals in the meeting, doesn't it, to actually behave pretty well, right? So that would be one. What's another?
I think Jez articulates it really well when we talk to corporates, Jez. And I pick it up because when you're involved in footy for so long, you take it for granted. But you talk really well about the next generation of leaders at footy clubs and how quickly football clubs have to. Do you want to extrapolate on that? Because I think that's a really good answer to M's question.
Yeah, well, sport invest super heavily in the emerging leaders or the emerging players, because you only get about 4 years to get these young men or women into the club and developed enough that you have to make a decision. Are you going to keep them or move them out? And so you owe it to them, and you have an obligation to them to teach and coach as hard as you can in a supportive way. So the good systems bring kids in, develop them really quickly, and then take them through, hopefully most of them. So I just don't, and that's why I think the date or the time becomes really interesting, because if you haven't developed those athletes by 22, 23, 4 or 5 years in, then they go. You've invested all that time, all that money, all that energy into those people, and they've just walked out the door. So you've got to put in place good systems, and you are time bound. It's going to be really interesting next week. I'm going to really push some senior leaders on that. Like, put some times on this, and see what happens. Because I think that's what sport does. It makes you time bound.
Yeah, no, I agree, guys. I know. Look, that's a great conversation. I think tying back together, boys, it's probably the systems we've spoken a lot about on the Culture Couch Live, isn't it? It's don't just put those things into your top exec group. Work a level down. Give them the opportunity to do the profiling, do the relationship piece. Reward and challenge, real talk, conversation. So all the systems we've spoken about, just don't leave it at the exec level. Get it to come down and concertina in your organisation. And the more you get involved in that, I guess that's probably the performance center was. If you want to just take on that, I mean, that's a really good segue into that, because that gives volume to the next group of leaders.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, boys. I know you got to shoot off. I know, Jez, you got to shoot off to a meeting, so we better wrap it up. We've actually had a good conversation.
That was
Shane,
good.
fantastic.
I like that one.
Shane, excellent on succession planning. Hopefully, everyone's learned lots. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll see you next week on the Couch Live.
Yep.